A business, a social business? Yeah. Did you know that there are businesses that are set up with explicit social goals? Yeah, it's what we'd call a social enterprise. It's under the umbrella of civil society. So, in their book, Business Ethics, Crane and Mathen, in their section on such matters, they define a social enterprise on page 474, contextualizing business ethics, civil society, and business ethics. They say social enterprise originally emerged from the civil society sector primarily as a way for nonprofit organizations, those charities that we understand and know about, to diversify their funding and become more self sufficient. For instance, the founders of the children's education and development charity, Free the Children, set up the social enterprise Me to We to market ethical clothing and educational products as a way of creating a sustainable funding stream for the charity. So they're a business that stays true to its principles but produces marketable commodities, goods, or services. There are some key differences between social enterprises, charities, and a corporation itself. Of course, we know the profit motive itself. Corporations maximize profit. And there's a nifty chart here that I'm going to just bring out some highlights from. Whereas we know that a charity, its entire goal as a nonprofit, must not make profit. All of the money that it so-called makes or brings in has to go directly to its goods or services. Whereas with the social enterprise, there can be profit, but there are different limits, tax bases, everything, that you can pay professionals, for example, a more competitive wage, and still the products that you produce all have this social goal. It means that they're self-funded. And to whom are they accountable? Well, as we know, a corporation is accountable to its shareholders, the shareholder model, whereas civil society organizations such as charities are totally accountable to the stakeholders. There's democracy amongst the stakeholders. A social enterprise, rather, operates on the line, and they must have democracy amongst the stakeholders and participatory democracy amongst the stakeholders. It means that those who are targeted by the intervention, by the good or the service, must also have some means of impacting, of giving feedback to what's being given to them. This means that versus a corporation where they produce a product that has to compete on the market with other products, we're producing a good or service, or again, a product that has to enrich the lives of the stakeholders. And therefore, those are our measurements, not just how many people buy our service, but to what extent their lives are enhanced. Let me give you one such example. I worked for a public-private partnership called Sesame Street, the Sesame Street Workshop. You might have heard of it, Big Bird, the preschool educational television show, children's television, with all the trademark Muppets by Jim Henson. It's important to say that because that's a nonprofit. There's a children's television program that teaches you your ABCs and 1, 2, 3, and how to get along and other social skills. But moving around the world, they needed to be self-sustained. And so they decided to market themselves in India as a public-private partnership versus the Sesame Street Workshop, which is a charity based in New York and has its programming in many parts of the world. They wanted to create an indigenous Sesame Street for this vast Indian market. And so we get Gully Simpson. Now, we know some of the characters from the American original Sesame Street, like Bert and Ernie. So I just want to mention a few highlights about Gully Simpson and why it's a social enterprise. Well, why is it a social enterprise? Certainly, they start with the trademark Muppets. They're not just puppets, but they're trademark Muppets that are used on the show to teach your children, again, their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. They have characters and character names that are from that market and identifiable to many different language groups in that market. But of course, it's a show about representation. And so there is a young girl who is one of the lead characters, and she's into science and math, and it's just a normal thing, and she's cool. There's a character that doesn't have a gender, and it's just not an issue. We know that unlike Bird and Ernie, many of the characters, Cookie Monster, Big Bird, they're actual animals, so their gender comes less into play. And Gully Gully Simpson, being created in the noughties, benefited from the generations of knowledge from the original Sesame Street workshop created in the late 60s, early 70s. Another thing that we did, and this was what makes us a social enterprise, is that we created preschools. Yeah, actual preschools that we could franchise throughout the country. So that was how we went about profit making. And of course, we would have toolkits, all the school materials that one would need that we created, branded around the Sesame Street India Project Gully Gully Simpson. And so I find that social enterprises have been a very rewarding career for someone who's business minded and interested in being in a dynamic work atmosphere. I'm not saying that that's not what charities are, and I've spoken about those in other videos, but specifically working for social enterprises, you get a different level of access to so-called the market. You also get a different level of autonomy. As we know, many charities are more strictly governed by what they can do. For example, the gag rule that we had in the United States, which meant that we couldn't talk about sex outside of the ABCs: abstinence, no sex before marriage, and condoms, in that order. So independent of that, Sesame Street, for example, could have a gender neutral character appropriate to preschool education. I found that as a person who identifies as genderqueer, very empowering, and also a workplace that I was attracted to. It meant that everyone in the sector and everyone with whom we worked, including commercial marketeers, commercial public relations organizations, the people who had to physically carry around or even create and learn to maintain these trademark Muppets, all of those people knew that they were coming into our world, that Sesame Street was and is a safe place. Cheers.